Welcome to the Darkling Radio, where every story drags you into the shadows. Here you'll hear spine-chilling horror tales told in a haunting, immersive style that keeps you on edge until the very last moment. When Lily Harper and Marcus Vale returned home late one night, they noticed a figure standing in the shadows with a smile that didn't belong to any human. What started as a chilling glance soon became an unstoppable presence, following them into every corner of their life. The first time I saw the smile, I didn't think much of it. I was walking home after work, the air damp and heavy, the last bits of sunlight slipping behind the rooftops. The street was nearly empty except for one man standing on the opposite side of the road. He wasn't moving, wasn't talking on the phone, wasn't even pretending to be busy. He was just standing there, angled slightly toward me, with a smile stretched so wide across his face that it didn't look natural. It was too stiff, too sharp at the edges, as though his mouth had been pulled into place by invisible hooks. At first I thought he must have been laughing at something behind me, but when I turned, there was no one else. His eyes were locked onto mine, and the grin never faltered. My stomach tightened. I walked faster, trying to shake off the feeling that clung to me. The streetlights flickered above as I passed, and I kept telling myself it was nothing, just some creep or a drunk. But when I reached the corner and glanced back, he hadn't moved. He was still there, head tilted slightly, grinning at me as if he knew I would look. That was when my chest went cold. I hurried the rest of the way home, my footsteps echoing against the silent pavement. By the time I closed my apartment door behind me, I was sweating. Though the night wasn't hot, I leaned against the door for a long time, listening to the quiet. Nothing followed me, no footsteps on the stairs, no knock at the door. I tried to laugh it off as paranoia, but I couldn't shake the image of that face. That smile, it followed me into the kitchen, into the shower, even into bed. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw it again, frozen and unblinking. Sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, checking the clock every few minutes, feeling more restless the darker it got. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and sat up. The silence was crushing. The hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the clock, even the creak of the pipes, all of it felt louder than it should have. I dragged myself out of bed and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside at first. The street looked empty. The faint orange glow of the lamps stretched across the road, shadows deepening in the corners. But then my eyes caught movement under the flickering streetlight. There he was, the same man, the same crooked tilt of the head, the same wide, unnatural grin. He was standing perfectly still, directly beneath the light, staring up at my window. My throat went dry, and I dropped the curtain immediately, stumbling back. My chest heaved as if I had been running, and I pressed myself against the wall, straining to listen. Nothing, no sound of footsteps, no knock on the door, just silence so heavy it made my ears ring. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, barely breathing. When I finally managed to crawl back to bed, I pulled the blanket over my head like a child, trying to block out the world. My eyes burned from not blinking, and eventually, I gave in to exhaustion. But even as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I felt it. That smile etched into the darkness of my mind. That same curve of lips, too wide, too still, lingering just beyond my closed eyelids. When I finally woke, my body was sore from tension, my sheets damp with sweat. Morning light poured into the room, soft and reassuring, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, just a product of my exhausted imagination. But then I noticed something that made my heart skip. On the inside of the curtain, faintly visible in the morning sun, were smudges on the glass. Fingerprints, as if someone had been pressing their hands against the window during the night, and the pattern of the smudges, they curved into the shape of a smile. The morning brought no peace, even as I tried to focus on small, ordinary things, making coffee, brushing my teeth, gathering my things for work. I couldn't shake the image of those fingerprints on the glass. They were faint, like a greasy residue, but their shape was clear enough to recognize. Smile. Someone had been close enough to touch the window while I slept only a few feet away. The thought made my stomach turn. I tried to tell myself it wasn't possible, that I was imagining patterns where there were none, but the more I looked, the harder it was to deny. The walk to work was no better. The streets felt different, like the world itself had shifted just slightly out of place. People moved past me, faces blank and tired, but I scanned every corner, every window, every shadow. I couldn't stop expecting to see him again, and I did. Not the man this time, but a woman. She stood across from the bakery near the bus stop. She was older, her hair tangled, her clothes mismatched, but her face carried the exact same expression as his. Lips stretched too far, frozen in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze was locked onto me, as if she had been waiting for me to arrive. I felt my chest tighten. I forced myself to keep walking, pretending not to notice, but I could feel her stare drilling into me as I passed. I didn't dare look back. I reached the office building faster than usual, barely aware of the traffic or the people around me. Inside, surrounded by co-workers, I thought I might finally feel safe, but safety was just an illusion. From my desk, I had a clear view of the street below. It was almost lunchtime when I spotted another one, this time, a teenager, standing on the other side of the road with his hands shoved into his hoodie. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his face was all wrong. That same terrible grin, stretched wider than it should be, his eyes unblinking as they fixed on me. I dropped my gaze, heart pounding, but curiosity forced me to look again a few minutes later. He hadn't moved. He was still staring up at me with that smile carved across his face. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't concentrate on work, couldn't join in conversations, couldn't think about anything but those faces, smiling, watching, waiting. By the time the sun went down, I was trembling at the thought of leaving the building. The streets outside were dim and slick from an earlier rain. I wrapped my coat tighter and forced myself to walk, each step heavier than the last. That was when I noticed the cafe across the road. The windows were bright with yellow light, condensation fogging the glass, and behind it, I saw yet another figure, a man in a suit, sitting alone at a table. His body was still, his hands resting flat on the surface, and his face carried the same grin I had seen before. He wasn't eating or drinking. He wasn't even pretending to be a customer. His head was tilted just enough to angle toward me, his eyes fixed on mine through the glass. I turned away, my legs moving faster, the fear now clawing at me like a living thing. By the time I reached my building, I was practically running. The hallway was quiet, but it felt like I wasn't alone. My keys shook in my hand as I unlocked the door, desperate to get inside, desperate to shut everything out. Relief washed over me as I stepped into my apartment, but it didn't last. Something caught my eye on the door as I closed it. A faint mark. At first, I thought it was a scratch, but when I leaned closer, I saw the truth. Someone had drawn it. A red smear curved upward across the wood, unmistakably shaped like a smile. The stain looked like lipstick, thick and greasy, and it trailed slightly down the door as though the hand that drew it had been trembling. I stepped back, my breath shallow. There were no sounds in the hallway, no footsteps, no voices. Just silence pressing hard against the walls. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing right outside my apartment, close enough to touch the door. And when I looked again at that mark, it almost seemed fresh, as if whoever drew it had been there only moments before I arrived. The days began to blur together after that. I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began, because all I felt was a growing heaviness that clung to me like damp air. Every time I left my apartment, I found them, different faces, different bodies, but the same expression. A man leaning against a lamppost, a young girl sitting on a swing in the park, an old woman standing still in the middle of the sidewalk, all of them smiling, all of them fixed on me. I stopped trying to look away. It didn't matter if I ignored them or not. Their eyes always followed. I started keeping track of how many I saw each day. At first, there were 1 or 2, then 3, then 5. By the end of the week, I counted nearly a dozen. It was as though the city itself was filling with them, and I was the only one who noticed. Nobody else reacted. People walked by without so much as a glance, even when a smiling figure stood perfectly still in the middle of the street. It was as if they were invisible to everyone but me. Inside my apartment, things weren't any better. I thought I would be safe if I stayed indoors, but the feeling never left. I would draw the blinds, lock the doors, check the peephole 100 times a night, and still, I felt eyes on me. The air grew heavier with each passing hour. My food went untouched. My sleep barely lasted more than a few minutes at a time, and I began to dread the silence more than the noise. Because silence meant they were waiting. One night I was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it, footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow, heavy, each one dragging against the old carpet like something being pulled along the floor. I held my breath, counting the steps. 1, 2, 3, closer, closer, until they stopped directly outside my apartment. The stillness that followed was worse than the sound itself. It stretched on so long that I felt my chest ache from holding my breath. Then came the scratching. Faint at first, like nails brushing gently against wood. It grew sharper, dragging down the length of the door, pausing, then starting again, over and over. My entire body trembled as I crawled silently out of bed and crept toward the door. Every instinct screamed at me to stay back, but I had to know. I pressed my eye to the peephole, bracing myself. The hallway was empty. Nothing moved outside. No shadows, no figures, just the dim glow of the single light bulb swaying slightly from the ceiling, yet the sound continued. Scratching. Steady and deliberate, inches from where I stood. My hands shook as I reached for the lock, but I froze halfway. If I opened that door, I wasn't sure what I would find. I stumbled back, my breathing shallow, and then the noise stopped altogether. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to wait, minutes dragging by like hours, before I dared to move again. Finally, I told myself I had to check the apartment. I needed to prove I was alone. I walked through each room slowly, every corner feeling colder than the last. The kitchen was empty. The bathroom was empty. The living room was empty. But as I passed the mirror in the hallway, I froze. For a second, I thought I had caught my own reflection moving differently than I had. My body jerked, but the figure in the glass stood still, its mouth curving into a grin wider than I could ever force my face to make. I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall, and when I looked again, the reflection was normal. My own tired, pale face stared back at me, lips pressed tight, eyes wide with fear. I tried to convince myself it was another trick of exhaustion, but when I turned away, I heard something faint behind me. A breath, not mine, close enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. The sound came from inside the apartment. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The footsteps, the scratches, the glimpses of that impossible grin, it all felt like it was closing in. That night, I stayed in the living room, too afraid to return to my bedroom. Every light in the apartment was on, casting long shadows that flickered with every movement of the city outside. I tried to tell myself that I was imagining things, that the stress and exhaustion had made my mind play tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. A shadow by the window, moving just slightly against the dim glow of the streetlights. I froze, my heart hammering, and focused on it. The shape became clearer, taking the form of a tall figure. It was standing there, just beyond the glass, not moving, but unmistakable. Its face was tilted toward me, and the smile, that same unnatural, stretched smile I had seen on every stranger, every reflection, every mark on my door. I couldn't look away. My limbs felt frozen. The figure didn't speak. It didn't move closer. It just stood there, silent, smiling. Its presence pressed down on the room like a weight, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw something at the window, but my body refused to obey. I could only watch as the darkness of the street seemed to bend around it, the shadows swallowing the edges of its form. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Time had lost meaning. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I blinked, hoping that when I opened my eyes, it would be a trick of my imagination, but the air felt colder now, heavier, as though the absence of the figure was a warning, not a relief. I stayed in the same spot, staring at the window, too terrified to move. Morning brought no comfort. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I barely dared to breathe. When I looked outside, I saw them. Dozens of them. Figures I had seen over the past week standing silently along the street. They were perfectly still, all facing my building, their grins wide and frozen. The city moved around them, unaware, but they didn't belong to it. They belonged to me. I backed away from the window, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence, that the world had not suddenly filled with these smiling strangers. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It followed me as I moved through the apartment. My hand shook when I picked up my phone. I considered calling anyone, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I didn't even know what I would say. How could I explain something that seemed to defy reason? By evening, the fear had grown unbearable. I decided I had to leave. I packed a small bag, shoved a few essentials inside, and made my way to the stairwell. My apartment door felt heavier than usual as I turned the handle, and when I pushed it open, I froze. Something was on the other side. I couldn't see it clearly at first, just a dark shape blocking the hallway. My breath caught and my hands trembled so badly that I dropped my bag. I bent down to pick it up, forcing myself to look, and that's when I saw them, pressed against the door at the end of the hall. Dozens of faces, men, women, teenagers, children, every one of them grinning. Their mouths stretched unnaturally wide, teeth gleaming white even in the dim light. They didn't move, they didn't speak. They just watched me. And then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Every single pair of eyes was fixed on me. Every single grin was the same terrible, impossible smile. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, and slammed my apartment door shut. My back pressed against it, heart racing, ears straining. The hallway was silent, but I could still feel them, waiting, watching. I pressed my face into the door, trying to shut them out, trying to convince myself that if I didn't see them, they couldn't see me. Night fell, and I stayed crouched there, shivering. I tried counting to keep my mind occupied, tried repeating my address, my birthday, anything to cling to normalcy. But normalcy was gone. By midnight I could hear them moving outside my apartment. Soft shuffling, whispers too faint to understand, and that faint, constant grin that seemed to press against every surface, every shadow. When I dared to lift my head, I realized the truth. They weren't just outside anymore. They were everywhere. I could feel their presence in the corners of the room, behind the curtains, even in the reflections on the glass table. The apartment was no longer mine. It had become theirs, and through it all, that smile remained, waiting, patient, hungering. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks, or maybe just hours. It doesn't matter anymore. Time has lost its meaning. Every moment is consumed by the presence of them, the endless army of smiles that seem to seep into every corner of my apartment. I stopped trying to leave. The hallways outside my door are no longer just filled with their faces. I can feel them pressing against the walls, flowing through the cracks, staring from behind every reflective surface. Mirrors, windows, even the polished surface of my countertop, they are there, always watching, always smiling. The exhaustion has worn me down, but sleep is still impossible. Every time my eyes close, I see their faces, stretching wider and wider until the room seems filled with teeth. I've tried counting, tried holding my breath, tried clenching my eyes shut until the shapes vanish, but it doesn't work. When I open my eyes, they are closer than before, not outside, not just at the windows or on the streets. They are inside now, standing just beyond the shadows, emerging slowly from the corners of the room, as though they had always been there, waiting. Last night, I glimpsed my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, my own face, pale and hollow from fear, staring back at me. But then my lips moved differently than mine should. The smile spread, impossibly wide, teeth too sharp, eyes too dark, and I knew it wasn't me. I stumbled back, pressed my hands against the cool tile, and the reflection vanished. The mirror was empty, my own face staring back, but I could still feel it. That grin inside me, crawling under my skin, pressing against my jaw, as if trying to force itself outward. I've stopped trying to eat. Food no longer tastes like anything, and my hands shake too much to hold utensils. I've stopped answering the phone. I don't check the news. I don't go outside. Even the faintest movement in the hallway outside makes my heart pound like a drum. But they're patient. They wait. They never leave. I've tried hiding, tried locking doors, tried blocking the windows with whatever I could find. It doesn't help. Earlier today, I noticed something new. Faint cracks had begun to form along the plaster ceiling. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I realized the shapes were faces. Faces pressed into the walls. Mouths stretched into that same unnatural grin. At first, I thought it was paint or the shadows playing tricks, but as I watched, the cracks widened slightly, like something behind them was pushing out, trying to get through. My skin crawled. My stomach turned. I tried to move away from the living room, but my own apartment feels like a trap. Every corner holds another pair of eyes. Every shadow hides another smile. I've started talking to myself just to hear a voice that isn't theirs. Sometimes I whisper my own name over and over, just to remind myself that I exist, but even that feels futile. They are everywhere. They are in me now. A moment ago, I dared to glance at the ceiling above my bed. The cracks had spread further, and through them, I saw it. A pale face, pressed up against the plaster, eyes black and unblinking, lips stretched impossibly wide into that grotesque grin. I froze, heart hammering, unable to look away, and then slowly it began to lower itself down toward me, stretching from the ceiling as though gravity had no effect on it. I can hear the faint sound of laughter now, not outside, not in the street, not even behind the door. It is inside the room, inside my head, bouncing off the walls, curling around my bones. I try to cover my ears. I try to block it out, but it grows louder with every heartbeat. The air feels thicker, heavier, as if the room itself is closing in. I don't know how much longer I can survive this. I have tried everything, every precaution, every attempt to hide or escape, but they are patient. They do not rush, they wait. And I know, deep down, that they will not stop until they have me completely. And now, as I press myself into the corner of the room, staring up at the ceiling, I feel it brush against me. Not a hand, not a shadow, something living, something cold, and closer than it has ever been. Its grin is inches from my face. I try to scream, but no sound comes. The last thing I see is that smile, stretching impossibly wide, before the darkness swallows everything. And I know, even if I survive or if anyone ever finds this apartment, there will always be another face waiting, another smile, watching, patient, hungering. It is not over. It will never be over.